Welcome to another installment in my complete chronological rewatch, where I'll be going back through almost every Star Wars film and show as I work my rates to the Rise of Skywalker. I've already checked out some of the movies, so be sure to check that out for yourself after this. Today we're going over the Clone Wars Season 1, Episode 8, Bombad Jedi. Set in 22 BBY, the same year that the Clone Wars began, Padmé discovers that her old friend and fellow Republic Senator, Onaconda Farr, has allied his planet with the Separatists during a diplomatic mission to the planet Rodia. In exchange for food and resources for his people, Onaconda captures Padmé and promises to deliver her to Nute Gunray. Sensing Padmé is in trouble, Jar Binks disguises himself as a Jedi, and with the help of C-3PO, courageously fights to rescue his friend and fellow senator. This was another Jar Jar episode, so I had to temper my expectations coming in. I didn't remember too much about it, other than the fact that I know it was far from a favorite of mine. There just isn't much here that I think works in its favor, other than maybe continuing into the next episode. It's a much sillier episode, and it does have moments here and there, but there's a reason I don't rewatch this often. Rodia is a fairly neat planet, and it gets some detailed architectural designs, but it would have been nice to get to see more locations. We meet this new character, Onaconda Farr, who we learn has a history with Padmé, who is somewhat of an uncle to her. Something I also don't think I've recognized before was that Padmé mentions her father being a senator as well. He could still be too young to appear in something like The Acolyte, but if the Amidala's have a long history of politicians, that would be a nice connection in the series. This episode shows us some of the problems that small worlds on the edge of the Republic had, and how some planets weren't considered as important because of what they didn't offer to the war efforts. We see this a few times throughout the series, but it is important to touch on because these planets are the ones most likely to join the Separatists. We get some goofy action with Jar Jar and C-3PO, and it was for much of the first half or so of the episode that I just found myself bored. I wasn't really interested in either side of the story, but I found that by the time of the climax and third act, I had started to enjoy myself a little. Maybe I had just gotten used to it, and had lowered my expectations more, but I think the second half of the episode is much stronger than the first. It shows a lot about how competent Padmé is when it comes to defending herself, and even Jar Jar is capable here too. Even though it is silly, him being mistaken as a Jedi creates some fun moments during the action where the Separatists actually believe him to be a Jedi, and some of his talents as a Gungan make that appear to be true. And then we get to the end of the episode, and maybe it was just because I was watching it more in depth, but I was not a fan of how this plays out at all. Padmé talks about her and Ono's little secret, which I guess I always just passed off and ignored, but based on what she says, we either missed a fairly important conversation between the two of them, or she just assumed that he would come to his senses based on what she saw in his expressions. Either way, I think a little more detail or information could have been provided leading up to this, or just change the dialogue. It's the same thing with Palpatine at the end. When he appears to them as a hologram, apparently he's somehow become aware of everything that happened here, yet there wasn't a single time jump since the final action sequence, so there was literally no time for that to happen. It's small critiques that I know are just for pacing and keeping the episode at a certain time, but watching it closer this time through, it did bother me a little. Let me know what you think of this episode in the comments below. Remember to like the video, and subscribe to stay up to date with my chronological rewatch. As always, thank you all for watching, and remember, the Force will be with you. Always.